Hey, Jim here. It is Wednesday, September 6th. And I had some thoughts last night. And whenever I have thoughts about what I want to talk about the next day, I just send myself a little email with like 2 words in it. And so my words were resting heart rate and flexibility. And where am I coming from? This is a rather bizarre thing. So if you are jumping in the middle of this, you probably need to rewind and go back to the very beginning and find the one where I kind of introduce myself and ask you to please forward my story to everybody. But anyway, uh, so resting heart rate, and this is interesting. The whole thing is always interesting to me, but so one thing about this whole condition is that because of this suction effect that goes on with your heart and uh, kind of the volume limiting effects of it, you have and the fact that most of your cells end up being apoptotic, so they're not consuming energy and they're not producing waste products and all these things. Your body has a very low energy requirement needs, and so it allows you to have, as I've explained in another video before, I think, additional stamina, and you get increased oxygenation to the brain and increased energy to the brain, and a lot of things like that, and so that's where I'm coming from with this resting heart rate issue. Is that so a long time ago, and I mean a long time ago, this is at least, oh gosh, 15 years ago, I would say, or more. They did a evaluation program where I work, where you could volunteer and they would, put you through some physical exercises and measure some different things about you, including flexibility and things like that. And so, I've always, been interested in my health because I know I have this condition. And so I wanted to compare myself to everybody else. Uh, and it was interesting because I did extremely well, let's just say. So I talked to the person that did the study later. She later went on to be the what do you call it? The health and wellness coordinator for a very large corporation here in the Tulsa area. And she told me that of all the people that she tested, I tested the best, the highest in both recovery to resting heart rate and flexibility, which is kind of weird because one, I don't believe in stretching. So I've run off and on throughout my adult life, and one of the things that I used to stretch kind of at the very beginning, but then I ran across research that said that there is no proof that stretching actually does you any good. And in fact, a lot of people get injured while they're stretching. And so I just kind of gave up on stretching. My whole thing was, hey, if something gets tight, then maybe I'll stretch it then. But if I'm not feeling tight, why put myself through any extra stretching? And the resting heart rate thing is, I think, really interesting because I'm no marathoner. Yeah, I've done the Tulsa Run a few times back when I was actually healthy, or I still had a terminal illness, so I don't know what you want to call healthy. Back when I measured as completely healthy, let's put it that way. My best time was like, so this is a 15K. I mean, my best time was like an hour 16, I think, something like that. I'm not sure if that's the year that I ended up vomiting whole bunches afterwards or not, but so it's not like I'm some awesome, speedster or anything. But the time for my heart rate to get from, on a treadmill where she got it up and elevated back to the resting range was the lowest that she recorded. So I thought that was interesting. And that kind of falls in line with, hey, if your heart doesn't really have to work that hard, to when you're at your resting state, then of course it's going to kind of get back there a lot sooner. So something else about that resting heart rate thing, and the flexibility thing, I think, let me just jump to that real quick. I think that has to do with the whole acid base thing of this, and I can't be super specific, but somehow it causes your muscles to be and everything to be more flexible, is all I can tell you. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Sorry. But to go back to something else about the resting heart rate. So from when this all started last year, so, it started, and so this restriction that I've talked about, that it's in the inferior vena cava, it can no longer hold that slightly closed with the suction. So if you can imagine, suddenly that restriction is free, and so now there's no longer a pressure differential across it, and you have a greater flow rate going through there all the time. Okay, and with this greater flow rate, you have all these fluids that start exiting my body that have been pushed into my skin and everything. But eventually, you get to where you lose so much fluid and everything, and I forget exactly what's going on, but essentially your heart starts failing a little bit by little bit, and as it fails, it's no longer able to do this suction, and so when you have a system of tubes that are being pulled through, okay, and you have less volume, and you're pulling through those tubes, eventually one of those tubes will collapse. And once it collapses, it doesn't open back up again, because if you think about it, if you suck harder, okay, it's just going to pull it closed even more. And so what you really need is pumping action to make the system work to where it doesn't do that. But so anyway, so what happens during this last year and a half is you're slowly your heart is slowly failing, and it's interesting. In the article it talked about how basically the condition causes your heart to force itself to fail, and I think that's what was going on in the year of 2020, 2021, when I started feeling tired all the time. I didn't even want to walk up a flight of stairs. I have more energy now, in than I did then, which is ridiculous. Now that I can't do things now that I did then, but I feel much more willing to go up a flight of stairs or whatever. I will tell you that, so what happens during this last year and a half is you get to these places where your heart, it's trying harder and harder and harder, and then you lose some amount of flow, and then so when whatever that is closes off, let me tell you, it hurts. And so you get that closing off, and whatever that area is around there, it hurts and hurts and hurts, and then pretty soon it just stops. So pretty soon you've got less and less area that it's actually getting blood flow to it, and you think, well, obviously you should have some type of rotting or whatever. No, all those cells are apoptotic. They don't require oxygen, and they're being preserved. And so it's just this, basically you just become kind of like this kind of, just a big hunk of flesh with very, very little circulation. In fact, one of the things that stood out for me from the article is it said, for these people who were immobilized at the very end of their life so that they didn't cause any stress on their heart, they could get to where they literally had, and this is straight out of the article, a thimble full of blood was all that was going on between their heart and their brain, and the rest of their body had no blood. And you think, well, how could that work? Okay, well, all that ATP that's being used by the rest of the body is being generated through candidiasis and ketosis. And I know that sounds bizarre, but that is the only other way for those things to have energy. But anyway, so to talk about that a little bit more about the blood flow and the resting heart rate. So what I've noticed over this last year and a half is that I'll get to a point where there'll be a day where my heart rate is really elevated and I'm not doing anything, and I haven't taken a gummy or anything like that, and I can tell my heart rate is racing, I don't feel out of breath at all. Okay, and then that's one of the things that is makes this even more insidious, that talked about when they finally go to the hospital, and the person it isn't out of breath, and they've got this racing heartbeat and everything. But anyway, so you have this racing heartbeat, and it's trying to keep flow through all the stuff, that whatever is the current state of everything, but it finally gets to where it can't do that anymore. And so you get some things that close off, and now your heart can relax, and you get a lower heart rate again. And it gets to where, eventually the people in the article had talked about how they never wanted to get their heart rate above 100, and they would just kind of walk very slowly everywhere and not exert themselves. Because if you get your heart rate up high, even with me just talking, okay, my heart rate right now is 86. But if you get your heart rate up high, it causes the valves to work too hard. The valves have been softened by this acid base switching back and forth, and the valves, they basically just kind of erode, and like little pieces keep falling off, and eventually the valve just gives out and the person passes away. Could be right in the middle of a sentence, because that heart is doing so little, and they're not breathless, that it can go unnoticed. And I only notice it because I have a watch, and I have looked at my resting heart rate, and I can chart it over time and things like that. So that's yet another thing about this that makes it insidious, where your heart is really failing, but you don't have the fluid accumulation that most people would have, for two reasons. One, the suction. Two, everything your skin has been tightened, all the cells are apoptotic, so no fluid that goes to your feet actually collects there. It just gets pulled out by this suction process, and that gets drained literally by your bladder. Don't ask me how that all works. That was complicated, but it was explained in the article. So I know it sounds crazy, and the proof, I guess, is if I'm no longer around, and there's an autopsy report somewhere that they really can't explain everything that they see. And so the things that they'll see will be like almost no blood in my system, that tissue will be abnormal, especially in my intestinal area and in my muscles, things like that. My skin tissues, all of that is abnormal if they bother to test it. Other than that, there's not going to be a whole lot of things to go by. I know it. One thing in the article it said was that one group of the patients, and I don't remember which group this was. I've mentioned before, there were several ways they could kind of choose to go at the end, but one group, it literally took saws to get them through their skin, and how thick their skin got from all of this. And yeah, I don't know. So there's my weirdness for today. If you know me well from work, you probably know what today was by recognizing that I wore this shirt there. I had a company or a work event. I showed up. It's not obvious that I'm unable to, put my arm back for this without major pain. It's or that I basically can hardly walk. I just kind of take tiny little steps everywhere. And so everybody probably thinks Jim's doing pretty well, which, it couldn't be further from the truth. But that's the way it's going. So it's Wednesday. Got a couple more days to the week. Got some doctor's appointments next week. I will see how things go. I'm just taking it one day at a time. I ate more carbs today because of this lunch. They had cookies at this country club, and they were such good cookies, and I ate like 3 cookies, maybe 3.5. Anyway, I'm a cookie guy. that's more carbs than I've had in forever. And so we'll see if there's any consequences to that. But you know, it's okay. I don't mind consequences at this point. I don't think. I think I'm just gonna go with it and see where it goes. I can make it to somebody's appointment next week, and I'll consider that a win. That's it for now. Take it easy. Buy some Bitcoin.